Tracking plus action equals improvement. Your rucking performance won't improve by accident or on its own. You can write down miles, times, pack weights all day long, but the real power comes when you use that data to adjust your training and make better decisions. Welcome to the Rucker's Edge podcast, a show all about rucking that is designed to help you develop a rucking routine, lose weight, and ultimately gain your strength and energy back. Whether you're an office worker with lower back pain, a fitness first-timer, or a new parent trying to get back to your pre-kids weight, this is the show for you. I'm your host, Spencer. Thanks for tuning in. In this episode, we dive into why tracking your rucks is the key to building momentum, avoiding setbacks, and actually reaching your rucking goals. You'll hear how measuring the right things can help you build a consistent routine, stay motivated, prevent injuries, and even help get back on track after taking time off. After listening to this episode, you'll know how to turn your ruck logs into decisions that will accelerate your progress and keep you moving towards your goal. All right, let's jump in. I was talking with my father-in-law the other day about a local hospital's business model, and he reminded me of a story about Peter Drucker. That's perfect for what we're talking about today with tracking our rucks. Peter Drucker, the guy who basically invented modern management, he has this very useful quote, which is, "What gets measured gets managed." Back in the 60s, Drucker was working with a big hospital. Like most hospitals at the time, they measured success pretty simply. How many beds do we have filled? How busy are our doctors and nurses? Basically, are we keeping everyone busy? But Drucker asked them something that nobody had really thought about. What is this hospital actually here to do? Because when you really think about it, the answer isn't fill beds or keep staff busy. The answer is help people get better. So Drucker convinced them to completely change what they were tracking. Instead of just counting occupied beds and staff hours, they started measuring what actually mattered. Recovery rates, how fast patients were getting discharged, and how often people had to come back for the same problem. And here's the thing, that simple shift in measurement changed everything. Suddenly, doctors and administrators were making decisions based on whether patients were actually getting healthier, not just whether the hospital looked busy. The results? Patients got better care. The hospital got better outcomes. It was a win-win. That's what happens when you track the right stuff. It's not just about having numbers to look at. It actually changes how you make decisions. And better decisions get you better results. This is just one of countless success stories where tracking data have improved systems or processes or results in general. Another good one that I really like, have always really liked, has been fascinated by, was Apollo 13. During NASA's Apollo 13 mission, the oxygen tank exploded. The astronauts and mission control abandoned the intended mission of landing on the moon to returning the astronauts back to Earth safely. That was only possible because minute by minute the astronauts were tracking their oxygen levels, power use, and CO2 buildup in the cabin. That just goes to show you, without tracking, you can't measure what's important. Therefore, you can't understand where you are in relation to your goal. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. So how does this relate to rucking? This is a rucking podcast. Why we haven't even talked about it yet. But we can track our rucks for the same reason NASA and Peter Drucker tracked their metrics. We want to improve our rucking routine so that we can achieve maximum output. There are several reasons why we track rucks. I came up with 8 reasons why we should track our rucks. I'll list them out here, but I'm going to go into a lot more detail for each one. The first one, and probably the most important one, it helps establish a habit. It develops our routine. The others include motivation. It can identify weaknesses. It confirms we're on track to achieving our goal. Provides some sort of accountability for ourselves. And then it avoids plateaus in our training program, avoids burnout, and helps us to avoid injury. Okay, so let's circle back to that first one. It helps us establish a habit. There's a really excellent book by James Clear. I read it a few years back. And actually, I would like to do an episode, perhaps summarizing that book. But it talks about building a habit. And with tracking our rucks, this is exactly what we can do. Tracking creates a visual cue. So seeing your progress in a log, a calendar, or an app reminds you to take action. It's a visible record of your past rucks, reinforces the fact that I am a person who rucks. Tracking reinforces the habit loop. So every time you track a ruck, you get a small reward from marking it done, which strengthens the habit loop. So there's a cue, your routine, and then reward. Logging the session is like mentally high-fiving yourself. And tracking builds momentum. So there's a consistency chain. And you can kind of think of it as you're trying not to break that chain. It helps provide that extra motivation. Okay, moving on to reason number 2 why we should be tracking our rucks is motivation. Rucking progress can feel slow because improvements aren't always obvious day to day. So being able to look back at the rucks that we've tracked shows measurable progress. A faster pace perhaps, longer distances, or heavier loads. Being able to see that last month I could barely do 2 miles with 20 pounds and now I'm doing 4 miles with 25 pounds keeps the momentum going. Reason number 3, it identifies weaknesses in our plan. Without data, it's hard to know what's holding you back. Looking at our rucking record reveals trends like slowing pace on hills or struggling with long distances or fatigue at certain weights. It lets you pinpoint whether endurance, strength, or recovery is the limiting factor, and it makes it easier to adjust training. Tracking doesn't just show you where you're strong, it shines a light on where you need to improve. Reason number 4, it confirms that you're on track to achieving your goal. Big goals like a Go Ruck event or weight loss or a distance milestone can feel overwhelming. Tracking our rucks helps break these big goals into smaller measurable steps. It keeps you honest about progress. You're not guessing if you're ready for that 12-miler with 30 pounds. The data is going to let you know. And it also builds confidence leading into the event or the milestone. Your log is like your GPS in your car. It tells you if you're on the right route towards your goal or if you need to course correct. Reason number 5, accountability. It's easy to skip a ruck if no one knows, and harder to stay consistent without structure. Tracking our rucks creates a record that you can't argue with. The rucks are either logged or they aren't. It works as a self-accountability. You don't want to break the chain like we mentioned before. You can share your rucks with a coach, a partner, or a rucking community to create an external factor for accountability. And while we're talking about sharing tracking data with others, I wanted to remind you the benefits of training with a partner. We mentioned this back in, I think it was episode 1 or 2 when we talked about the benefits of training with a partner. But when you share your rucking data with others, it has a similar effect. There's a peer motivation effect where knowing your buddies are putting in the miles pushes you to keep up with them. Posting your rucks in a group chat or an app or a community makes it more likely for you to stay consistent because others can see your progress. Lastly, there's a support and encouragement effect. When you miss a session, others notice. And when you hit milestones, you get celebrated. Reason number 6 is it helps us avoid plateaus in our training. So how tracking can help? Well, it identifies patterns. Are you stuck at 3 miles with 30 pounds for weeks? It provides data to gradually increase one variable, either weight, distance, or pace, taking the guesswork out of it. And lastly, it makes progress measurable so you can see improvements even in the small increments over time. Reason number 7, it helps us avoid burnout. Without structure, we can push too hard, especially beginners. And too often we're thinking more is always better. That leads to a mental fatigue and a loss of motivation. So tracking our rucks can show us total workload over time, volume and intensity. It helps spot when you've been stacking too many long or heavy rucks without recovering, and it makes it easier to plan down weeks and recovery sessions. We talked about this in the previous episode about rucking plans. It's a good idea to pencil in some slower or easier recovery rucks. And lastly, reason number 8, my favorite, is it helps us avoid injuries. Injuries usually come from spikes in volume. You're going too far, too fast, or too heavy, or you're ignoring early warning signs. So tracking helps prevent sudden jumps in mileage or load because you can see your progression. It helps spot trends like slower pace or unusual fatigue before an injury sets in. Looking back at my ruck logs, I've had to step away from rucking on 3 occasions due to injuries I got while rucking. And I can go back to my training logs and identify exactly what caused the injury. So it happened 3 times. The first one, I jumped from 10 to 40. It's an insane jump. I was out for a week. Number 2, I jumped from 10 to 40 again. I was out for 3 weeks that time. And number 3, I added a dumbbell to my carry, and I was out for 2 weeks. Had I been reviewing the data closer, I could have put 2 and 2 together and identified these issues and prevented further injuries. And talking about injuries, here's kind of like a bonus reason why we should be tracking our rucks, is it helps you get back to your rucking when you come back from an injury or a break. So after time off from nursing an injury, most ruckers either do too much too soon or lose motivation because they feel like they're back at square one. Tracking your rucks shows you where you left off so you can build smartly instead of guessing. It lets you scale back gradually using past data as a benchmark. It boosts confidence. You can literally see how you climbed before so you can do it again. And lastly, it's a roadmap to success or results that you know you can achieve because you've already done it once. All right, so those are the 8 reasons why we need to be tracking. Let's talk about what data we need to be collecting during these rucks. There are several metrics that we could be tracking, but I've broken it down into the essential metrics we need to track and useful metrics, but not necessarily essential. There are 5 essential metrics we need to collect during our rucks, and they are, well, I've grouped weight, distance, and pace into one because that's, for rucking, all intents and purposes, that is what rucking is. So weight, distance, and pace is the first one. The second one is when we ruck. Third one, our heart rate during the rucks. Fourth one, the terrain. And the last one, how you felt. Now, this is the qualitative data that can provide some pretty good insight. For instance, your times may stay the same, but you may feel that it's getting easier, an indication you might want to consider pushing harder. To help with your analysis later down the road, you could turn this into a metric that's quantitative by measuring the level of effort, and you could give it a value between 1 and 5. 1 being, okay, that was pretty easy, and 5 was, yeah, I had to push really hard to achieve that one. All right, now let's go on to the metrics that are useful but not necessarily essential. And there are, 4. There are 4 of them. The first one is where you ruck. Second one, the gear you used. The third one, weather conditions. And the fourth one was if you did it by yourself, a solo ruck, or if it was a social ruck. Now you're probably thinking, man, that is a lot of data. I get it. After a ruck, I'm exhausted. I'm focused on cooling down and hydrating. The last thing I want to be doing is standing still and writing something down or typing something on a screen that I can barely see because the sun is so bright and the screen is so dim. I would advise you to build it into your post-ruck routine. While you're icing your joints or doing your stretches, be logging your ruck. Or do what I do. I hit save on my Garmin, and then later that night, I fill in the data that my Garmin couldn't collect. All right, so now you know what data to collect. But let's talk about how to collect it. Now, back in the day when I was running cross country, my coach advised us to track all of our runs. And everybody used one of those black and white composition notebooks. We would take a ruler and draw in columns for the date, the distance, the time, and the pace. And it was actually really cool to see at the end of the season all the different runs we had going on and kind of reminisced on stupid things that may have happened during those runs. But you can still do that. You can still use a composition notebook. It isn't nearly as efficient and comprehensive as some of the tech that's available out today, like the wearables I've talked about or some of the apps. But it's still kind of cool if you want to do an analog type of version. There's something about pencil on paper that seems just pretty cool, especially when the page is full and the pages are kind of curled at the end. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But, some of the wearables out there, the Garmin, that's what I use, my Garmin watch. Also, the Apple Watch. I used to have one. I don't have a lot of recent information on the Apple Watch. I haven't owned one since, 2018. That's when I switched to Garmin because the battery life is significantly longer in the Garmin. At least it was back then. I think it is still now. But those are some of the wearables you can use to track rucks. There are a few apps out there. I know the most common app used in the rucking community as of the recording of this episode is Ruckwell. I used it a few times. I liked it. It definitely did the job. It definitely tracked the data that I needed. There's a new one coming out. I haven't used it because it hasn't been released yet, but it's called Rucker. The hype is pretty high around it. I think a lot of people are looking forward to it. I'm curious about it too. So I'll be looking into that as well. Okay, I want to take a quick break here before discussing how you can effectively use the data you've collected from your rucks to improve your rucking gains. To say once again, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you found this episode helpful or interesting so far, please click the follow button in your podcast player so you are notified of new episodes. Also, if you know someone thinking about starting rucking or would benefit from rucking, please share this episode with them. It might just give them the motivation to start or keep pursuing their rucking goals. All right, back to it. So what do we do with the data that we've collected? Well, you use it to make decisions. Here's the thing about tracking. Collecting data is only half the battle. The real magic happens when you actually use that information to make better decisions for your rucking plan. Let me tell you a story that perfectly illustrates this point. Back in 2020, my wife and I were getting close to starting a family, and I decided it was probably time to start seeing my doctor on an annual basis for checkups. They started tracking my cholesterol levels during those annual checkups, and initially my cholesterol level was high, but didn't seem too alarming at first, but each year it crept up a little higher. By the end of 2022, my cholesterol was up to 235. In 2023, it plateaued, which at the time felt like a relief, but really it just meant I was stuck at an unhealthy level. Deep down, I knew I wasn't taking it as seriously as I should have. I told myself, I'll deal with it later, but each lab result was a reminder that later was running out. When I got my cholesterol results in 2024, something clicked. Seeing that number again, unchanged, now with baby number 2 on the way, that was my wake-up call. I made the decision to commit to eating healthier, sticking to a consistent exercise routine, which later turned into a rucking routine, and taking my health into my own hands instead of waiting for it to get worse. Now in 2025, my cholesterol is down to 187. So from 235 to 187, that's a 48-point drop. That number is more than just a stat. It represents a turning point. And I know that 187, that is still kind of elevated, and I am still progressing on lowering that cholesterol level. So the lesson, tracking plus action equals improvement. Just like my cholesterol, your rucking performance won't improve by accident or on its own. You can write down miles, times, pack weights all day long, but the real power comes when you use that data to adjust your training and make better decisions. That's how you get stronger, fitter, and keep moving towards achieving your goal. Okay, so how do we get from data collection to decision making? A lot of people that exercise fall into the same trap I did with my cholesterol. They track everything, but never let the data change what they do. It's like having a GPS, like I mentioned earlier, but never following the directions. If you want to improve your rucking, you need to stop only counting the inputs, like I went for a ruck, period. Don't get me wrong, tracking the fact that you went for a ruck is good for habit building. But once you've developed that habit and you want to start making real progress, you really need to start tracking the outcomes that matter. So pace, distance, weight, all those other metrics that we discussed earlier. These metrics will help you identify where you're slowing down, when you're improving, and when you're holding back. So how do we use this data to make these decisions on improving our plan? Well, my tips are every month, ask yourself these 3 questions. What's actually working for me? Where am I spinning my wheels? And what should I focus on next? So basically, what's working, what's not, and where do I go from here? Let's break these down. So, okay, what's actually working for me? Ask yourself these questions. Are you consistently hitting faster paces on certain routes? Are you carrying heavier loads without the dead tired feeling? Are you bouncing back quicker after longer rucks? When you see these patterns, double down on whatever you did those weeks. Maybe it was rucking in the morning instead of evening, or that new route with more hills, or spacing your heavy rucks differently. Your data will show you what's working. Now do more of that. Okay, the second question. Where am I spinning my wheels? Well, If you've been stuck at the same pace for 6 weeks, or you're still gassed after 3 miles when you want to be crushing 5-milers, your data is telling you something isn't clicking. Don't just keep doing the same thing hoping it'll magically improve. Maybe you need more recovery days, or to add some variety to your routes, or to focus on building your base before adding weight. The numbers don't lie. If you're plateaued, it's time to change something. All right, last one. What should I focus on next? This is where your data becomes your roadmap. So look at where you are now versus where you want to be, and let that guide you for the next 4 to 6 weeks. If your goal is a 12-mile ruck, but you're still working on consistent 6-milers, don't jump to heavy weight training. If you want to carry 50 pounds, but you're struggling with 30, maybe focus on building that load capacity before worrying about speed. Your tracking data takes the guesswork out of progression. It shows you exactly what the next logical step should be. The key here is actually using the information to adjust your training. Too many ruckers collect data like trophies, but never let it change what they do. Your data isn't just a record of what you did, it's a guide for what you should do next. And in conclusion, just to clarify, I'm not saying if you're not tracking your rucks, you're doing it all wrong. Getting out there and rucking at any frequency is a win. The point I am trying to make, though, is that if you want to continue to progress along your fitness journey, you need to be tracking your rucks. Just imagine looking back at 6 months of rucking data and seeing that you've gone from struggling with 2 miles to crushing 5-mile rucks with 30 pounds. That's not fantasy. That's what happens when you track consistently. All right, now you know why you should be tracking your rucks and what to do with the data to collect. In next week's episode, we'll discuss how to set your rucking goals. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please follow the show in your podcast player so you don't miss an episode, and share this episode with a friend that might find it helpful. Also, are you doing anything differently with your data that I didn't mention perhaps? If so, shoot me a message or comment on a post of mine on Instagram at the Rucker's Edge Pod. Again, my name is Spencer, and thanks for listening to this week's episode of The Rucker's Edge.